Hi there, welcome everybody. This is Nate Gustafson. Thank you so much for joining me for today's presentation. This is geared for all my friends and colleagues out there in the hospice world, whether you're serving as a CNA, as a hospice volunteer, working in the office, taking calls, supporting our bereaved families, a chaplain, social worker, nurse, whatever your role is in hospice. I hope that this presentation will encourage you and your team to raise the bar of the quality of care that you're bringing to these wonderful people at the end of life, on their end of life journey. Today's presentation I've entitled Soul Symphony, the 7 movements of care and connecting. And so let me share my screen and we'll get started. Soul Symphony, the 7 movements of care and connecting. Over the years, I've had the privilege of working in hospice for over 15 years now, and I've served in all sorts of different roles, from supporting our bereaved families to leading a volunteer program to being a chaplain as a core part of the interdisciplinary team. And in everything that I've done, I've noticed that all of the roles in hospice, even the person who answers the phone in the middle of the night, all of our roles play such an important part of bringing hope and healing and bringing quality care to these people at the end of life journey. And so I wanted to present something, just as a symphony has multiple movements, has multiple layers to it, has multiple parts and multiple players. So is the hospice team. So is hospice philosophy, built upon a team of players, all playing off of the same sheet of music to bring comfort and health and healing and hope on this difficult journey through the end of life. And so I hope that you'll realize that as we listen to the symphony of these people, as we work together as a symphony, as a team, we can bring greater care and connection and higher quality care, no matter what your role, no matter what you do on the hospice team. So today I've got some objectives I want to hit on. And number one is just to really understand the keys of empathetic listening. I think we would all realize that listening is key to everything that we do in hospice, and bringing empathy, bringing your heart to the connecting opportunities is so critical. So we're going to understand the keys of empathetic listening. Also want to identify how the levels of listening relate to quality care. Third and fourth, want to increase your self-awareness of the layers of loss. We realize in hospice, we're working a lot with grief and loss. Everything that we do is grief and loss. But it's not just death. It's not just illness. There are multiple other layers of loss that we must become more aware of, more in tune to, if we're going to raise the bar of the care that we're bringing to our families and our loved ones that are receiving our gracious and wonderful hospice care. And then finally, I want to help you apply what you're learning here, apply some strategies that'll bring hope and healing in the most practical sense. Again, whether you're answering the phone, whether you're calling bereaved families, whether you're leading a group, whether you're setting up emergency respite as a social worker, whether you're taking calls about referrals, whether you're on the front lines of bandaging wounds, helping families prepare for the end, whatever it is, we all have to apply some new strategies to raise the level of care and connection, which ultimately leads to higher quality of care and greater support of our people at the end of life and on their journey. So let's discuss for just a moment, what are the mechanics of quality care? You know, if we were going to change a carburetor or put on new brakes on your old VW Bug, you'd need to know what parts you needed. You'd need to know the mechanics of how it all works, the right kind of wrenches and tools and parts and how they all fit together. So really the mechanics of quality hospice care. We understand really our philosophy is based upon comfort being that number one quality that we want to bring to people at the end of life journey. We talk about how we're here to palliate symptoms. We're often in tandem with palliative care as a way of bringing this together at the end of life. And so we understand it takes a team, it takes multiple parts, multiple specialties, multiple disciplines. It takes a lot of looking underneath the hood and examining the parts and seeing what works, what doesn't work. It involves listening for those little nicks and dings. And when the check engine light pops on, we're quick to plug it into the computer and figure out why that engine light is on and what exactly needs to be done to fix whatever the problem is. But ultimately, just like a mechanic trying to solve a engine that won't start or a leak, They need to look at the whole picture. So quality care begins when we look at the whole picture of the individual, their family, their scenario, their systems that they're a part of. And what we can do is really focus on caring, connecting through multiple movements, multiple layers of this story. And that's what we want to focus on in today's presentation. So I call this the 7 movements of care and connecting. The 7 movements of care and connecting, and it begins with when we listen with empathy. Now, again, we're going to get to empathy in just a moment. We all think we know something about empathy, but we have to realize that this takes intentional re-examination of our definitions to make sure that we are focused on what it really means to be empathetic. Second, it's examining the story of the person in front of us. That could be the patient, their family members, the caregiver involved in their care at the end of life. We have to examine their story, and we have to look at our story. There might be parallel tracks that were very similar. We might find out that we were raised in the same neighborhood, went to the same schools, attended the same kind of church, have the same kind of rooting interest in the football teams or soccer matches, or love for a certain kind of food. Those are great opportunities to deepen the level of connecting, but we also have to be very careful to make sure that we're not overstepping our lane as we're helping these folks on the end of life journey. And that goes to the key here, is to establish the connection. So once we start to listen with empathy, we're gathering information, we're listening, we're caring, and then the connection is established. What's our goal? What's our role? What's our ability to help in any given moment? If someone's having a 10 out of 10 pain crisis and I'm not a nurse, the best connection I might be able to do is to get a nurse on the phone right away so that they can establish a connection with the person in need to find out what needs to happen to alleviate and palliate that 10 out of 10 pain crisis. And all along the way, no matter what your role is, again, whether you're just answering the phone, whether you're taking referrals, whether you're out there trying to get new referral bases for your program, it takes listening, and it takes listening to the losses, and not just the loss meaning death, but loss of identity, loss of purpose, loss of independence, loss of connection, loss of the ability to practice certain things that brought meaning and significance to a person's life. And realize we're also listening, and we're looking for, how are they coping? What are the ways that they're coping through this difficult time? And along the way, we're assessing for strengths, liabilities, what's helping, what's hurting, what seems to have worked in the past that isn't working now. We're looking at all those things, and we continue to reflect. I think so often in hospice, we're so busy doing everything and trying to help and solve and fix, and there's always a crisis and there's always a fire to put out, that we don't take the time to stop, to think, to reflect, to really see what is there that we can tune in on that brings this person extra meaning and purpose in these very critical moments. And then ultimately, we're looking also for strategies for healing. This doesn't mean that we are, in and of any one person on the team, going to be the ultimate healer, but we can all collectively share our thoughts, share our experiences, share our own wisdom and insights on what could bring healing and hope for this person in this difficult time. So let's continue. Why is empathy so critical? You know what? We all have a deep human need to be understood and to understand others. Empathy bridges the isolation gap. So many times when someone is sick or ill or aged past the point where they've really outpunted their coverage, and all their friends have passed along, and even someone who's 100 might have a 75-year-old adult son or daughter who's facing their own critical illness and ailments. So they're really, especially for our hospice folks who are at the very end of life, are so isolated, and illness can do that. And so we want to realize that empathy bridges the isolation gap, especially when there's crisis or advanced illness. Empathy restores connection. The American Medical Association put out a great training resource for its physicians and its healthcare teams called Steps Forward, where it looked at empathy and helped coach up and train up, especially in the midst of a global pandemic that doesn't seem to have an end in sight still. There's such a critical need that we treat people with empathy, and that we understand the power and the connection that empathy brings. It's been proven that empathetic listening eases fears and worries, especially in a healthcare and a crisis situation. And it builds trust and allows for movement forward. It's been said that according to Stephen Covey, that change and progress only happens at the speed of trust. And isn't that the case in our world in healthcare, especially in hospice work at this critical juncture? We can only help families and individuals and care teams take steps forward as fast as they'll trust us, as fast as they'll allow us to build this connection. So that's why empathy is so critical in these 7 movements of care and connection that will raise the bar of the quality and the ability to provide the best end-of-life care. So you may think that you know what empathy is, and you probably do. I believe you. You guys are smart cookies. You work in hospice care, but empathy is really a foundation. And so I love this book on listening by Neil Pembroke from Australia. In his book, The Art of Listening, he asks the question, what is foundational in the ministry of care? And if you're involved in hospice work, that is by definition the ministry of care. Even if you're not a spiritual person or religious person, you're involved in the service and the care of human beings at this very critical time. And he answers his own question by saying it's the deep receptivity to another's pain. So what is foundational in the ministry of care? It's the deep receptivity of another person's pain. So empathy means that we engage curiosity. We use our own healthy curiosity, our own transcendent curiosity to understand, to dive in, to feel with another person and be with them in their moment and what they're going on and what's going on in their emotions. I love this very simple definition by Dr. Kara Powell, as she defines empathy as 2 steps: noticing and caring. I love that, noticing and caring. Take that with you and your hospice team and let that sink in. Notice and care, and you will be exemplary people of empathy. And so not only is empathy important, but it's listening with empathy that is so important. And I call this harmonious listening. It's like when you hear a sweet melody or you hear a special chord of music, and you may not even be musically inclined. You may not be able to carry a note at all, but you know it when you hear it. If I just slammed my hands on all 88 keys of the piano, that would be disharmony. That would be dissonance. But if I hit C, E, and G, those 3 notes, that's a C chord. And that is harmony. Those parts all fit together. Those notes are meant to fit together. So harmonious listening is really listening that fits together with your hands, which means that you're getting into the content of the story. You're asking who, what, when, where, why, and how. Noticing the facts, active listening, restating, paraphrasing, asking clarifying questions. Then with your head, this is where your curiosity needs to be going on. Your processor, you need to have an internal processor that's going along as you're actively listening. And you're asking why. Why are they telling me this? Why are they telling me this now? You're leaning in, you're listening for the emotions and the nonverbal cues of how they're telling their story. What do you mean by that? What's this like for you? Those are great questions to ask as you process with this person. And then ultimately, harmonious listening is at the heart level. That's the metaphor and the images. This is that kind of subconscious, below the surface, below the iceberg, so to speak, parts of a person's story. And this is where the unconscious is surfacing. They may say something to you, and you may have heard this in hospice work: I just want to go home. I just want to go home. Or they're looking for their mom or their dad. There's something that in those stories about family, in those stories about meaningful people in their lives, there's a connection that if you're listening with empathy, if your harmonious listening skills are up to speed, you're going to help bring this person's story to the forefront and help them feel reconnected, feel validated and heard and understood. So the 7 movements of care and connecting, which I believe if you implemented this across the board in your hospice team, it might be that you're catching this and you're a part of a nursing home team or a care unit at a hospital or an assisted living, or just trying to care for elders in your congregation who are going through a rough patch, if you follow these 7 movements, you'll see that they will eventually be a yellow brick road, so to speak, of greater care and connecting, which ultimately leads to higher quality of love and care and support for people when they really need it. So number 1, we listen with empathy. That's what we've already covered. We tune into the story, we tune out distractions, we listen with empathy. Second movement is that we examine their story and we examine ours. We realize that every person has a story. Every person has a beginning, middle, and end to their life's journey. And oftentimes we'll find that our life and their life can line up pretty closely. And all of a sudden you realize it's like railroad tracks. Their life is on the north track and your life is on the south track. And the more and more you get connected and the more and more you get closer to one another, those tracks are really close together. And the temptation is when your stories are that closely aligned, it's very tempting to jump the track and all of a sudden make your story and their story all intersect together and mesh together, enmesh together, which we know is not healthy. Connecting is great. Finding those close connection points is helpful and healing and hopeful, but jumping the track and making your story and their story all intertwined is not helpful and not a healing part of the journey. So what does it mean to connect? It means that you're really tuning into what would be most helpful now in this moment. What is the need in this moment as you listen, as you empathize, as you tune in, as you ask clarifying questions, as you listen at 3 levels? You're really trying to assess and boil it all down to what is the one golden nugget that I could help out with in this moment? What would be most helpful now? And sometimes you're doing that through validation. It sounds like you're really angry about how you've been treated lately. And you'll just watch someone's eyes get really wide and you're like, really? How did you know? Because I'm listening to you, because I care about you, because I hear your story and see that this is really troubling you. That is connecting. That is when you go from just being someone who's trying to throw solutions at someone to really partnering together in that moment and connecting together for that golden moment and finding out what really it will take to bring a resolution, to bring healing and hope in that time. And as well as you connect, you're also listening for the losses, not just death, but all the losses, loss of independence, loss of spiritual rituals that meant something to that person, loss of a family unit, how they used to identify themselves. Maybe they lost their identity when they got sick and severely ill. Maybe they really identified themselves as that strong, independent-minded woman who when they need this extra care, when they can't do everything on their own, is just terrorizing them on the inside because they've lost that strong and that independent woman identity that they had carried with them throughout their whole life. So we continue with the movements and we assess for strengths and liabilities. So strengths and liabilities of how they're coping in the story, asking them about their support system, listening for a support system, asking them as a whole, what's the hardest part about going through this? Or what's this been like for you? How have you all even managed to get out of bed in the morning going through this difficult time? And you go on and you assess and you look at the meaning and the purpose of what's going on. What brings you hope? What helps you to keep going? What does this mean for you? How do you have purpose in your life when everything seems to have gone through so many losses, so many struggles, and you're just feeling like you're at your wit's end? What helps you to keep going? That means that you're reflecting with the person. And that's not something you can do in a 5-minute or even sometimes in 10 minutes. This might be the 10th visit. This might be after 6 months of building rapport, building connection, empathizing, listening over and over and over before you can get to a point where you're at these last movements. But finally, you're really wanting to explore hope and healing, create safe places for them to mourn, to grieve, to process what's going on. We just have to be safe people, creating safe and sacred places for people to mourn and reconnect during this difficult journey. So how do we do that? That's where we're going to go through next. We're going to look for losses and landmines, because I feel like in hospice work, This is such a critical step for us. Key losses might be material losses, relational losses, loss of ideal, function, role. And we're looking for the landmines, and these are coping strategies that just aren't working so well. We know that oftentimes people use denial and anger as coping mechanisms. We know that people are often tempted to turn to addiction, to overeat, over-medicate, over-analyze, over everything. They just can be so addicted to even their own addictions, addicted to just being addicted. This overdrive, some people in stress and chaos just kick it into overdrive and push the pedal to the metal even harder and faster. Some people go through extreme withdrawal. Some people really feel like they've just lost the ability to live, to laugh, and to love. Those are all dangerous landmines that we need to be on the lookout for and make appropriate referrals, utilize our team members, utilize healthy, strategies to get people through those times. And helping people process, not just, again, throw a bandage over it, but help people process the emotional triggers, the parallel stories, things of that nature. And as I shared earlier about the railroad tracks, if you find that you're always getting extremely emotionally worked up to the point where you just cannot function, you cannot keep any perspective when you're working with certain types of clients or patients or situations, it's time to step back and examine, why is that a landmine? And why is that impacting me? And what is it about my story that gets triggered every time I see someone have this same issue in their story? That's where professional counseling, spiritual support, emotional support, mental health support, all is so critical for you as caregivers to have in your back pocket so you can process and work through these difficult times. Really, it comes down to a balancing act. In any given moment, I get it. You have 100 things on your plate to do. You have priorities going everywhere. You have families calling. You have work supervisors calling, looking for information. There's documentation, there's information, there's strategies, there's meetings, there's all this going on. And you sometimes don't even feel like you have a chance to breathe. That's when you have to develop a practice of just awareness, just taking 3 deep gut breaths to help reset, recenter yourself, and then step into action after you've had a chance to think. It's so important to think before you do, to feel what you need to feel before you jump into action. That'll be so important in order to bring connection and care to our people, which ultimately, again, leads to that greater goal of higher quality of care, greater management of people's end-of-life journey so that they can have a peaceful, meaningful, and even joyful end-of-life journey. So again, we put the movements into motion, and we do that by being on time and ready to roll. And that means that sometimes we have to take extra steps behind the scenes to make sure that we're on time and ready to roll when people need us at their most difficult moments. And in the very opening moments with someone, this is when it's so key to already be prepared, because oftentimes within the first 2 to 5 minutes, I found out in my chaplain visits with people, there'll be one golden nugget, one golden moment that is the key to connecting in that moment, the key to bringing high quality, empathetic listening. And if I'm not aware and not ready for that golden moment, then ultimately I'm not ready, and they're going to miss out, and I'm going to miss out on an opportunity to have a great connection and support for this person. I want to practice the harmonious listening, listening to the content, listening for the process, the emotions behind the content, and then listening for the metaphor, listening for the stories and what they mean. And focusing it all down to that greatest moment. What is it in that moment that needs to be put into motion? What needs to be focused on? What do I need to do in this moment, this very moment, to help bring the greatest care and connection for this person that I'm working with? And when in doubt, validate. Be silent, be still, validate, admit when you don't know what your next step is going to be. It's okay to say, I don't know what to do here for you. This is a very difficult and troubling time, but I do know that I'm here with you and I'm committed to being with you in this moment. And we're going to work on this together. I'm not going to leave your side until we are able to move forward together in a caring and connected way. And then finally, know when it's time to go. Sometimes people do not need you in their moment. Sometimes people do not need your intervention. And so sometimes it's just more important to sit down, to shut up, and just be quiet. And then after a moment, if they don't need you anymore, make a quick and speedy and graceful exit instead of lingering and lingering and lingering, trying to drum up more and more and more. It's okay to know when it's time to go. Here are some resources for you, some books, some resources. I've also done a presentation on harmonious listening. So if you want to dive into more of that, reach out to me and I'd be glad to share that with you. So again, this has been the Soul Symphony, the 7 movements of care and connecting that anyone in the healthcare, in the education field, in the people helping field, you can utilize these 7 movements of care and connecting to raise the level of service and support that you're bringing to people, whether it's the end of life journey as a hospice provider, whether it's their faith journey, whether it's their educational adventures, whatever it might be. I hope that you'll find these movements helpful and supportive in your efforts to bring hope and healing when it counts most. Have a wonderful day, everybody.